that even under apartheid, these infringements were considered so grave that a president and a minister of state were forced to resign. President Ramaphosa refuses to be as good as his word and act against corruption, act against criminality in our parliament. Our colleague Karabo Khachau then went and did an entire table of everybody who was appointed and discovered, lo and behold, that there were a whole lot of deployed ANC cadres. So the next question, obviously, was to ask how were they selected? And the minister said it was by an independent board of experts. Now, when we dug a little bit further and found out who these experts were, 3 out of the 6 were employees of the minister in her own department, and several others were deployed ANC cadres from various positions, and I have them.
Guys, I really suspect that one of the things that's going to cripple and probably tumble the presidency of President Cyril Ramaphosa before he leaves office is this propensity for silence regarding giving adequate justice or having adequate action on certain issues that require justice. So this case of this Minister of Higher Education, Nobule Nkabane, shaking the airwaves, and this actually follows in the wake of the firing of the DA Deputy Minister, I think, of Trade, Andrew Whitfield, all right? The DA now is really going full frontal, taking the bull by the horn, actually going for the jugular in terms of pursuing justice for what they have called a fraud by Minister Nkabane. So they argue, and especially if you listen to Helen Zille is actually arguing that, even in the apartheid regime, all right, that I think there was a time when a certain minister called Mulder and even John Foster at the time actually had to be forced out of office because of this kind of lying and misrepresentation and actually telling blatant lies, all right, to the parliament. Senzum Chuno, police minister, have actually been accused of this. I'm making another video soon where MK's, leader in the parliament, John Schloppe, actually argues that Nchuno is a pathological liar. I'll be making a video about that so you understand. But also, the whole case now with this Nobule Nkabane is actually going haywire because it's one of those perspectives where when you listen to Helen Zille, she actually argues that, on what basis could we have an Andrew Whitfield fired, probably for visiting the United States? I know President Ramaphosa, the presidency argued that there wasn't adequate permission and all of that. But then this silence on this continuous perpetration of what the DA especially is calling fraud and other forms of vices that they're unable to really understand. I think even today I'll be making another video where the head of the Walter Sisulu Institute is actually now going also frontal, arguing that this should come, result in the, evacuation, if I could use the word, or kicking President Ramaphosa out because of what he calls a pattern of silence, a pattern of evading responsibility, a pattern of not meting out adequate justice for cases, especially regarding leaders, parliament leaders that should actually meet justice and really secure that guarantee for the people that, yes, we can trust the leadership governing us. So this is where South Africa now finds itself. And in terms of vote of no confidence, I think it's really interesting and important to really understand what Helen Zille argues would be the parameters to probably kick a President Ramaphosa out following a vote of no confidence. Let's just quickly listen to Helen Zille analyze this, and I'll play a video where she breaks down how the DA seems to now pursue the lack of accountability by this Minister of Higher Education, Nobule Nkabane.
We're here today for the simple reason that President Ramaphosa refuses to be as good as his word and act against corruption. Act against criminality in our parliament. Those kinds of actions go unchecked, whereas what President Ramaphosa perceives as a slight, which is a deputy minister not asking him permission to go on a private trip that he didn't have to ask permission for, that is punished in the most severe terms. But serious fraud and the misleading of Parliament is somehow condoned by President Ramaphosa's government. That is an enormous double standard, and that shows you that the ANC isn't at all interested in combating corruption. This matter concerns Minister Nkabane, the Minister of Higher Education. She announced certain appointments to the SETA boards, the Sector Education and Training Authorities, which are crucially important in the higher education sector of South Africa. Our colleague Karabo Khachau then went and did an entire table of everybody who was appointed and discovered, lo and behold, that there were a whole lot of deployed ANC cadres. So the next question, obviously, was to ask how were they selected? And the minister said it was by an independent board of experts. Now, when we dug a little bit further and found out who these experts were, 3 out of the 6 were employees of the minister in her own department, and several others were deployed ANC cadres from various positions, and I have them listed here. So far from being independent people who had come in as experts to make the appointments, we had the minister's chief of staff, we had a chief director for the SETAs, accountable to the minister, and we had the director of corporate services, who's very close to the minister. So she put 3 people who worked for her and 2 others, one of whom denied that that was his job afterwards, into choosing these critical roles for people who administer many tens of millions, supposedly in service of higher education in our country. And so that was a blatant lie to a committee of Parliament, which is considered to be a lie to Parliament. This was a blatant lie to Parliament and a misleading of Parliament. Now, that has been held in the past to be fraud, and lying to Parliament and fraud are 2 criminal contraventions. They are criminal contraventions. They are not just indiscretions or lack of consideration or perhaps disrespect, as some people believe has been shown to President Ramaphosa by our colleague Andrew Whitfield. What has been done by Minister Nkabane is fraud and misleading Parliament, both of which are criminal contraventions. Now, we obviously can't let that go. We can't let that ride, even though certain deployed cadres have quickly been withdrawn as part of the cover-up. We see what's going on, and we see just how much ANC ministers, to support and deploy ANC cadres, are prepared to put people who are accountable to themselves into positions that should be taken by people of extreme integrity and professional independence, mislead the entire setup, undermine it, to deploy ANC cadres, and then lie about it to Parliament. We obviously can't sit back and take that, and that is why we are laying formal charges. There are several precedents to this in South Africa's history, both during our democracy and before our democracy. Before our democracy, you will remember the information scandal. Most of you weren't born yet, but I was in your shoes because I was a journalist in Parliament covering the information scandal. And when it turned out that Connie Mulder, who was a minister then, had lied to Parliament, he was forced to resign. And when that lie could be linked to John Vorster, who was the president, the prime minister at that time, change of constitution in the meantime, of course, he was forced to resign as well from the presidency of the country. So it is very important to understand that even under apartheid, these infringements were considered so grave that a president and a minister of state were forced to resign because of a lie they committed to Parliament or even only knew had been made to Parliament. Tony Yengeni was found guilty of fraud for misleading Parliament, and that is where the precedent of a fraud contravention comes from. Tony Yengeni received a very high punishment. So even under Thabo Mbeki and others, lying to Parliament was not tolerated and should not be tolerated now. It is very important to understand that we have to, as the official opposition who's now part of government, but it's clear we have to continue our role as opposition in order to hold the ANC and the president accountable. We are here refusing to take the serious criminal act lying down.
When was the decision taken to lay criminal charges?
The decision was taken during the course of this week. This week, as you know, has been dominated by the outcry over a deputy minister going on a privately funded DA trip to Washington, D.C. And although he wrote to the president for permission, and the president never replied to him and hasn't to this day, and although he didn't have to apply for permission to go on this trip, he was fired as a deputy minister. But a whole minister lies to Parliament, does a cover-up to prevent people holding her to account for deploying cadres, and the president does absolutely nothing. And it's not premature. The documents are here. We know exactly who she appointed. We know exactly where they work and to whom they account. We know exactly who they appointed to the CETA boards. And we know that in a flurry of guilt, the minister quickly withdrew some of those appointments, which were then just part of the cover-up. There's nothing premature about it. The facts are all here, and they are set out in Karabo's affidavit, which she will submit when she lays the charges. The facts are on the table. The facts have never been clearer. But somehow, even when the facts are there and crystal clear, the ANC cannot find it in itself to hold its members to account.
Ma'am, the DA is said to withhold its support from the budget vote process, in particular when it comes to the human settlements in this department. Won't it negatively impact South Africans if the DA says that it's acting in support?
This is Minister Nkabani, which is higher education, and we will definitely oppose her budget vote. When we used to be in opposition, we used to often oppose budget votes to express our grave dissatisfaction with the performance of the minister. Just because we are now in the government of national unity does not imply that we must accept this kind of blatant infringement of the law. And we will continue to hold the government to account, especially if the president will not do so. And we are going to be there in Parliament explaining what an outrageous defiance of the law the minister has put up here, and why under those circumstances it is impossible for us to support her budget vote.